This is Gansbaai, a small fishing town on the southern tip of South Africa, about 2 hours east of Cape Town. For 3 decades, it was the great white shark capital of the world. Tour operators ran boats out of this harbour every morning. Divers paid thousands of dollars to sit in cages and watch the sharks move through the water below them. The sharks were always there. Then, in 2017, 2 orcas arrived, and in the space of a few months, the great white sharks of Gansbaai were gone, not reduced, not stressed. Gone. Scientists went to find out why. What they found was not a disease, not a fishery collapse, not pollution. It was 2 individual animals, with names, and a hunting technique nobody had ever documented in any species anywhere on Earth. The great white shark has spent 11 million years at the top of the ocean's food chain. There is no animal in the peer-reviewed literature that hunts adult great whites. There was no predator-prey model for this. No framework. When marine biologists first recovered the carcasses off Gansbaai, they assumed the injuries were caused by boat strikes. Then they looked more carefully at where the cuts were. Every animal, same location, between the pectoral fins, opened from the outside in. The liver removed, nothing else touched. That is not a boat strike. That is not a scavenger. That is a decision. Before getting to who made that decision, you need to understand what the liver of a great white shark actually is. In a large adult, it can account for up to 28% of the animal's total body weight, filling the majority of the body cavity. It is packed with squalene, an oily compound the shark uses for buoyancy in place of a swim bladder. Squalene is extraordinarily energy dense. The orcas are not eating the shark. They are extracting the single most calorie-rich organ in the ocean and leaving the rest of the carcass untouched. The 2 orcas responsible were first identified off the South African coast in 2015. Researchers named them Port and Starboard for the direction each one's dorsal fin collapses. Port's folds left, Starboard's folds right. Collapsed dorsal fins occur in captive orcas and occasionally in wild populations, typically from trauma or the physical stress of sustained surface swimming. They are unusual but not unheard of. What Port and Starboard do is something else entirely. Their hunting technique works in 3 stages. First, one of the orcas approaches the shark at speed, not to bite, to ram. A full-speed collision from below or the side. The goal is not injury. The goal is disorientation. Here is the biology that makes this work. Great white sharks, like all sharks, are susceptible to a reflex called tonic immobility. Flip a shark upside down and its muscles lock. Its breathing becomes rhythmic and shallow. It enters a state researchers describe as a trance. It cannot bite. It cannot turn. It cannot flee. The shark that has spent 11 million years at the top of the ocean's food chain becomes, in the space of 3 seconds, completely defenseless. Port and Starboard figured this out, not through instinct, through learning. The evidence for that is in how the behavior changed. The first documented cases in 2017 involved both orcas working in coordination. One rams, one holds. By 2023, something had shifted. In June of that year, researchers off Gansbaai documented Starboard killing an adult great white shark alone. Solo. No coordination. No port. Starboard had internalized the full sequence well enough to execute it without a partner. That is not instinct. Instinct does not improve. What happened to Starboard between 2017 and 2023 is the same process that happens when a human practices a skill until it becomes automatic. The orca got better at killing great white sharks, and then it did it by itself. Here is the number that tells you what this means at scale. In February 2023, Port and Starboard killed at least 17 sharks in a single day. Not great whites that time. Broad, nose seven-jaw sharks, a different species, but the same method. Tonic immobility, same incision point, liver removed. 17 animals in one sitting. Not because they were hungry in the way a predator gets hungry, because the technique works and they apply it to every large shark they encounter. The carcasses began washing ashore at Gansbaai in 2017. Then they stopped, not because the killing stopped, because the great whites stopped being there to kill. What happened next is what marine biologists call the cascading effect, and it is what makes this story something other than 2 unusual orcas with an unusual diet. When great white sharks sense orca presence, even without direct contact, they leave, not reluctantly, immediately. Researchers attached tracking tags to great whites in False Bay, another historic aggregation site south of Cape Town. When Port and Starboard entered False Bay, the tagged sharks began moving within hours. Not days, hours. They swam south, away from the coast, away from their feeding grounds, away from behavioral patterns they had maintained for years. False Bay lost its resident great white population. Gansbaai lost its resident great white population. The shark diving industry that had operated out of these harbours for 30 years collapsed. Operators switched to bronze whaler sharks to keep their businesses alive, and the Cape Fur seals noticed. The seals haul out on Seal Island in False Bay. For decades, the great whites hunted them there. The seals had evolved specific evasive behaviours around that threat. They moved in tight groups. They stayed close to shore. They timed their movements around the sharks' feeding patterns. When the great whites left, the seals began appearing on beaches they had avoided for generations. Rocky outcroppings, sandy stretches, areas of the coastline that had been effectively shark-controlled territory for as long as researchers had been documenting the ecosystem. The seals did not know the sharks were gone. They discovered it by testing the water. An apex predator's absence reshapes an entire ecosystem faster than most models predicted. Here is what the science has not fully resolved. Orca predation, according to current estimates, accounts for 5 to 10% of the total decline in great white sightings in the region. The rest is human-driven. Longline fishing, gillnet bycatch, historical shark nets and drumlines deployed along the KwaZulu-Natal coast. The data suggests the great white population in South African coastal waters was already under significant pressure before Port and Starboard arrived. The orcas did not create the crisis, they accelerated it, and they added something the models could not account for: behavioral displacement. A shark killed by bycatch is one animal gone. A shark driven from its habitat by two orcas takes every shark within detection range with it. In June 2023, when Starboard killed its first solo great white, the researchers who documented it did not describe it as a predation event. They described it as a behavioral milestone, an animal demonstrating individual skill acquisition in real time. The language they used was careful and precise, the way scientists are careful when what they are observing does not fit cleanly into any existing framework. What Port and Starboard are doing has no prior record in the scientific literature. No orca population anywhere in the world has been documented developing and transmitting a specialized technique for hunting adult great white sharks. This behavior appeared in two animals in 2017 and has been escalating since. Starboard now executes it alone. The question researchers have not yet answered is whether it will spread. Orcas are among the most socially complex animals on Earth. Their hunting techniques are cultural. They are taught. Young orcas in a pod learn from older ones. Port and Starboard are not part of a documented pod structure in the way most orca populations are organized. They are anomalous in their social isolation as much as in their behavior, but they encounter other orcas. Other orca populations have been sighted in the same waters. Whether the liver extraction technique transfers, whether another individual has already learned it by proximity, is not something the current data can answer. The great white shark is listed as vulnerable on the IUCN Red List. There is no confirmed global population count. Estimates range from 3,000 to 10,000 individuals are ranged that wide because great whites are migratory, deep-ranging, and exceptionally difficult to survey. The species has no population buffer. Great white males reach sexual maturity at around 15 to 17 years. Females take longer, some not reaching maturity until their early 30s. A shark removed from the population at 8 years has contributed nothing to the next generation and will not for another decade if it had survived. Port and Starboard are still in the water. Researchers are still tracking their movements. The great whites have not returned to Gansbaai in the numbers that defined the town for 3 decades. In 2017, when the first carcasses washed ashore, the working assumption was a temporary disruption, an anomaly that would resolve. What it turned out to be was two animals discovering something that 11 million years of evolution had not produced an answer for, and getting better at it every year. Tell me in the comments, is this a local anomaly contained to two individual animals? Or is this the beginning of something the great white shark has never had to adapt to before?